Thank you for staying with us. I know it's already a long day, so we'll do our best to make it lively and interesting conversation. And for me, it will be an easy job because we have put together quite a wonderful panel for this discussion on an important discussion that is information integrity. I am Camille Grenier. I'm the Executive Director at the Forum on Information and Democracy, the implementing entity of an intergovernmental agreement that was endorsed by 55 countries around the world, including, of course, Armenia. And our job is to support governments that seek to implement democratic principles in the information and communication space. We do that through policy, research, and international coordination. Last year, in September, when we were gathered for the first edition of the Yerevan Dialogue, a lot of panelists discussed how 2024 was the election year, with all its challenges related to election integrity, disinformation, foreign interference, and so on. But for us, it was also the year of information integrity. Not that we had solved all the issues facing the information space, but a year throughout which we clearly defined and coined the principle and the notion of information integrity, notably through the UN Global Principles on Information Integrity, the Brazilian presidency of the G20, the Global Digital Compact endorsed by the UN, and we'll get back to that, the OECD recommendation on information integrity. It is, and I quote our good friend from Brazil, João Brandt, who is the Secretary of State for Digital Affairs, an umbrella concept that allows us to discuss issues ranging from press freedom and media sustainability to data privacy and internet governance. And at the core of the notion of information integrity, there lies this concept that we first planted in 2018, the right of every citizen to have access to reliable, independent, and pluralistic information. But I will not be the one telling you all the secrets about information integrity tonight. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists today. Dr. Alison Gilvold, founder of Research ICT Africa, Dr. Rupa Hook, member of the UK Parliament, Ms. Angela Khristrian, lead of strategic communication and participatory governance reform within the Office of the Prime Minister of Armenia, and finally, Mr. Gyan Tripathi, lawyer, and as you can see behind us, rapporteur of the Observatory on Information and Democracy. Thank you so much for being with us today in Yerevan. We'll do a first round of discussion around some of the recent work and some of the challenges that you've been working on, and then a more global discussion on some of the opportunities and challenges that we are facing in the future. And Gyan, I would like to start with you. You recently worked with us on the first research cycle of our Observatory on Information and Democracy. We went through the first synthesis and research synthesis of the information ecosystems, and I would like you to run us through this work and also maybe the main conclusions that you had. Thank you.
Thanks, Camille. Distinguished speakers, Excellency, and members of the audience. When we first set out to create an IPCC for information, we had to look beyond single platform phenomena and treat the news industry, AI systems, and data markets as one entangled information ecosystem. Here, we looked at systems of people, practices, values, and technologies configured in their social, cultural, political, and economic contexts, where power relations decided whose voice travels and whose does not. That structural lens provided us with three key findings. First was that asymmetrical power and not individual gullibility is the ecosystem's deepest fault line. Business models that rely on pervasive data extraction and behavioral targeting give a handful of firms the ability to set the technical rules of visibility. Those rules systematically reward emotionally charged or divisive content, hateful content, polarizing content, driving the viral spread of misinformation and disinformation, and eroding trust in the public. Legacy and local news outlets, already de-established by falling advertising revenues, are pushed into dependency bargains in this asymmetrical battle, with platform gatekeepers further concentrating their agenda setting power. Second, mis and disinformation should be read both as symptom and also amplifier of wider democratic distress. The review shows that harms associated with mis and disinformation are symptoms of complex changes in society and important amplifiers of those changes. In other words, treating false content alone without tackling the incentive to generate this, to disseminate this, and to make it viral, that incentive structure that weaponizes it is equivalent to cleaning polluted water while leaving the chemical plant upstream untouched. Third, research and policy responses are still fragmented and heavily skewed. Two-thirds of the over 1,500 sources that we examined were evaluated, they originated in the global north, showing a clear large gap of the research that comes out of the global south on these issues. That research bias mirrors the unequal distribution of technical infrastructure and moderation capacity, reinforcing a now widening AI divide. Pulling these threads together, I think the report's headline conclusion would be that safeguarding democracy today hinges on five inseparable agendas: human rights, contesting data monetization, exclusion and inequitable inclusion, governance, and transparency and accountability. The meta analysis, therefore, does not prescribe a single silver bullet. Instead, we insist that any credible reform package must treat information, integrity, market structure, human rights, and public interest capabilities as a single policy domain. Back to you, Kamil.
Thank you so much. You still had 2 minutes, but maybe that will give us more time to get into more details on some of the issues. Indeed, one of the things that came out from this report is the interconnectivity between different challenges. Some of which we discussed notably last year during the G20 and the Brazilian presidency of the G20. Alison, you wrote one of the main reports on the issue fitting into the G20 presidency. And now your country, South Africa, is chairing the G20 this year. So I would like to have your reflection on where the successes last year with the Brazilian experience and what maybe are the challenges or the opportunities with the South African G20.
Thank you so much, Camille. If I can just take us a step back before I get to that, just to for us to reflect, and I doubt anybody in this room needs to be reminded how rapidly this terrain is developing, and also the increasing complexity of solutions that we're trying to find here. So many of you will have been involved in and will recall that some of the things that led to Brazil picking up information integrity as one of their priority areas for the G20 was the UNESCO work on the Internet of Trust, work that really was prompted out of COVID to deal with some of the issues around disinformation and planetary challenges for disinformation, of course, together with climate change that had been in ongoing areas of disinformation and were very much picked up by the G20 presidency and continue to be by UNESCO. But I think what's really interesting is that, just a few years ago, this was essentially seen as an internet problem. It very rapidly, by the end of the report, the guidelines on that emerged from the Internet of Trust meetings are actually called guidelines on the regulation of platform regulation. So very quickly it became evident that the challenges around disinformation were not just about the internet and this availability of this general purpose technology for misinformation and deception, but that it was actually the platforms and these asymmetrical power structures that existed in this now increasingly completely unregulated terrain. And I think, over the periods just leading up to these various G20s, there has been a lot of pressure, both within the US under the Biden administration, more than there'd been before, the Senate, more than there'd been before, and then certainly in the European Union with the various legislation that's come out there that put pressure on these big tech companies to take some responsibility. But I think the whole framework for that kind of regulation at that time was very much responsible and ethical, self-regulatory kind of regimes that these big tech companies seem to be under pressure to respond to. And I think, we had seen some sort of progress there, although there was lots of, I believe more money being spent on lobbying at various points than actually on some sort of, external research outside of their R&D in their businesses. So enormous amounts of money going to persuading governments to continue to let them self-regulate. And I think, that at least we were in that position of pressure, and I think that was in the context in which the G20 under Brazil also picked up these issues about how the, human rights, we could actually move towards kind of audits and transparency reports and these kinds of things that that the big tech would be taking up. And, I think, within a very short period of time, within 6 months, this quite fragile regulatory framework that was at least putting pressure on big tech has been completely disassembled. And, we now, all those sort of very marginal, in my view, quite marginal undertakings around content regulation and those sorts of things, of course, have been rolled back. And, the big tech seems to be able to now operate with impunity. Even some very interesting technical work done in this area around, deep fakes and things has kind of just stopped. So just to quickly answer Camille's question, which was to say that, the digital economy this issue only comes up in the digital economy working group of the G20. And so it really needs to be framed in an economic context for it to be accommodated within the G20. But it's actually a very useful frame because, any good Marxist will tell you the material conditions of what is happening is what is influencing these outcomes. So I think the importance about the Digital Economy Working Group, Brazilian's ministerial statement, was that it gave attention to the integrity of information online and the trust in the digital economy, recognizing that free elections, or disinformation during elections can create political instability that affects economies and affects livelihoods and affects citizens. So I think the intersections of these things that we were talking about is completely recognized here. But I think what was important about the G20 meetings in Brazil was that they really begin to recognize the very dramatic impacts of the speed, of the scale, of the reach of these new technologies, and the ability to, really the virality of it, that you could very rapidly spread this disinformation, and that we seem to have very few mechanisms to be able to respond to those, that our traditional fact-checking and these kinds of things, even our media, traditional media, intermediated media checks on these things were kind of taking too long. And of course, this was happening in a context in which at least those media who had played this fourth estate role, globally across were already being undermined by these digital platforms and their expropriation of their content, but also already using that content in kind of for disinformation and other purposes, or using it to counter the intermediated information. But I think what was important is that they also began to recognize the importance of what other technical mechanisms there might be for authentication, for provenance mechanisms related to technical standards, that the companies, still in this idea that they were willing to make those changes, might be able to help users actually identify false information. The point being here that with these very rapidly changing technologies, the cost and the quality of deepfakes has become, greatly reduced, the cost and the quality of deepfakes greatly increased. And so I think the response is, what kind of technical responses could be that could at least say, this information comes from somewhere, or you can verify it there. So these authentication mechanisms and things. And so that's the issue that's really been taken up in the South African G20 within the Digital Economy Working Group. And of course, it does come up in a special AI task force that there is within the G20 as well. But there is going to be a workshop on generative AI and deep fakes, which is trying to deal with this issue that AI is many things now, that it's changing very fast, and different kinds of models and different types of AI, whether it's frontier models or generative AI or genic AI, require different technical regulatory responses. And so trying to nuance this debate will be an important part of objective of this workshop. And also just to say, sorry, just cut me off when we've got no time. Just, okay, just because I haven't kept track of time, sorry. But just to say, this is, of course, very important that this is also happening in the context of the Global Digital Compact and various other things that have really put some momentum on this. So that at the same time as you've got a clawing back and a pulling back by big tech and a seemingly impunity in what they're doing globally, but in the United States particularly, which has unraveled laws and protections. I think at a global governance level, there's a recognition of the need, the absolute imperatives of reliable information, of the damages of disinformation to human rights, to sustainable development goals, to quite sort of survival of our planet aspects to this that do provide us with the platforms for global collaboration that are going to be the only way that we can address these problems.
Thank you so much, Alison. Maybe you can see, there is already a lot of things that have happened in this field. And clearly we can definitely share some resources on the Internet for Trust guidelines, the Global Digital Compact, and so on. But something that often comes up is that we need these global frameworks, as you rightly said, but we also need to constantly adapt and understand how a solution or a specific policy can be adapted to the national context, to different environments. And so I would like to turn to Angela on the Armenian experience in fighting disinformation, in fighting for information integrity, notably through the reform on strategic communication that was led by the country most recently. I would like you to tell us a little bit more about the experience on framing this reform and working on its implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camille, and dear participants, thank you for staying here. If you are here right now, it means that the topic is really important for you, so thank you for that. I will start with a very obvious statement. There is nothing new under the sun, and disinformation campaigns, spreading of misinformation is not very new. For medieval, now we are talking all the time that we are living in our bubbles. There are echo chambers in social media. For medieval man, an echo chamber was his village where he was living, and the information sphere that he had was the bubble for him. Now it seems that we have more opportunities to select our echo chambers, where we want to go, what ideas or what values we should believe. But whenever we choose some echo chamber, the problem is that because of algorithm bias, we are imprisoned in these echo chambers. And here is the most dangerous part of the development of digital technologies in communication. Now misinformation and disinformation has more opportunity to spread, and it spreads very quickly, very effectively, and our job also as governments is to react effectively, don't allowing that it harms our national security. As a government, we realize that the hybrid war techniques, disinformation really risks our national sovereignty. It risks our democracy. And we also realize that the strategies we had before, it's like reacting to disinformation, debunking, they don't work anymore. So we talked about fact-checking and other techniques, but and there is no one universal pill to fight disinformation. But we realize that one of the most effective steps that we can do is the proactive communication. And strategic communication is not now the job only for press secretaries or communication officers. Now it is important for the whole government, and it requires whole society approach. And here we realize that we need to reform our system to make more resilient institutions. And we initiated the strategic communication reform with the agenda of creating enough capacity within government to communicate transparently, proactively, and we reform not only the system how we talk, we also reform the system how we listen. So it is not about communicating one way, it is also about participation. And we believe that creation of this ecosystem, during all our panels we were talking about ecosystems, and also information ecosystem is very important for us to strong democracy. And this reform aims to serve these goals that the government has. As for the AI technologies, you know, usually I compare AI to knife. I think AI is a tool. Knife is a great tool in kitchen. However, it is an awful tool when in the hands of killer. So what we need to do as government, we need to master this tool effectively. I can bring one example. I forgot my business card today at home before coming to this event, and I asked to AI to create a business card for me, and AI helped me to create my business card just in 2 seconds. And this is perfect. This is a great tool for use, for good values, for democracies, and our challenge is to master AI and use it for proactive communication. This is what about the reform. I would like also to emphasize that misinformation is not something that is a challenge for only 1 or 2 or 10 countries. This is an international challenge, and we need to fight together, and we need systematic approach. This is not about some random cases of sharing experience or some random capacity building activities. It is about systematic approach, and we need to create systems, institutions to fight against this challenge.
Thank you so much for your feedback and for sharing the experience that you had in Armenia. Totally, and I think we'll align on the need for a systemic and almost holistic approach in addressing these challenges. Rupa Hook, you are a member of Parliament in the UK. I would like to have also your perspective. You've seen the evolution of the information ecosystems and its challenges, and how it has amplified sometimes crises, how it has brought new crises. I'd like to have your view as a legislator of, you know, what could be the role of legislations to address these issues.
Yeah, thank you, Camille. And Baravzes, everyone. This is my second time in Armenia. I have a very substantial Armenian community in my constituency in London. In fact, I have 2 Armenian community centres from 2 different factions, and they hate each other. So, you know, I must thank everyone for putting on this really magnificent conference, and thank you for everyone staying so long, since 9 o'clock. Congratulations, or Shnor Havor, in fact. So, look, thank you, Camille, for the question. I've been an MP now for 10 years, and I think my conclusion really is that the digital landscape is changing much faster than any legislation can. So, you know, 10 years ago, it was all filing cabinets, whereas now, I mean, even 10 years ago, social media was Facebook and Twitter. Now Twitter is called X, and we have all these other things. So, and I've noticed my job as a legislator as well. Before, people would have to write a letter, find an envelope, find a stamp, go to the post box, post that to send in some online abuse. And I seem to have had over 10 years, kind of about 1 a year person is locked up for threatening and abusive things towards me, which has got a lot easier that an angry person with a keyboard can type away. So we have this online safety bill. Originally, it was called the Online Harms Bill, and that has lasted 5 different prime ministers. It started in 2016 under Theresa May. It only just received royal assent in 2023, and only, I think it's come into force earlier this calendar year, 25. But I mean, it's some of the stuff that Alison was saying as well about how to regulate the unregulatable, that even to this day, we haven't had a big headline case of this legislation because the regulator is trying to thrash out how to properly execute this piece of legislation. So it's meant to apply to big tech. The idea is that these big companies should be accountable. And that came actually out of a grisly suicide, a young teenage girl in 2016, Molly Russell, on the coroner's report, it actually said social media made her do it. Now, I think in those days it was Reddit. And since then, we have so many more different sites. TikTok and all these other things didn't exist then. TikTok is actually banned from parliamentary devices because of the Chinese influence. So if you try and look at that from within Parliament, it stops you. And again, the phone has become all-encompassing. If you think of 10 years ago, in Parliament, they only accepted cash in the restaurants. If you were taking someone to eat, you had to have the physical money. Now, you know, our phones, our watches, actually this is an old watch, but I have a modern one at home. This is so I can see what my staff is doing in London. But anyway, our watches, our phones are substitute for all these things now. We have cryptocurrency. So, I mean, it's difficult. And where do you put the balance between freedom of speech and privacy? Because if you think of the history of human communication, usually that's private stuff. Me phoning you, me having a conversation with you one-to-one. Whereas this this Online Safety Act means that any big company should hand over its file. It's meant to be to protect children, to stop another Molly Russell case happening. But then since then, there's this program on Netflix, Adolescence, people are talking about. It's fiction, but it's been debated so many times in Parliament as another. And again, last month of August, we saw big riots in the north of England in the UK, all built around disinformation. You know, something like the Gaza war, which I'm pleased was discussed here in the not the last session, the one before that. Because originally when I looked at the conference program, I didn't spot it, but it did. I mean, that's the most documented war ever, but it's not because journalists aren't really allowed in. In real time, we're seeing some real atrocities, starting with the atrocities of October the 7th. People have body cam filmed this. So I don't know, it's quite paradoxical. We're the most informed generation ever, but we don't know how to tame this beast of the big tech that does need regulation, does need reining in, but then how do you balance it with the freedom of speech? So this is a long and rambling answer. I don't know if it's at all related to your question.
I think you touch on three important things. First is, if we want information integrity, we need to have journalists on the ground who are actually producing reliable content. They need to have access, and this is why the discussion on press freedom is so important to that conversation on information integrity. The second one is we also need to connect this conversation with other related topics, such as the youth, the health, mental health issues. Brazil is doing a lot of work also with Armenia to connect this with climate change issues, for example, and we really need to make sure that people are aware that it has a direct impact on their daily lives. And the last one is around implementation. And we've seen how, we've had a lot of attempts over the years to regulate this space, but the devil is always in implementation. I think thank you so much. We already said a lot of things, and I see that time is actually running. So I'd like maybe to talk a little bit more about the future, maybe in 2 or 3 minutes. But Alison already touched a little bit about the G20 and South African presidency. But maybe briefly, if you had like 2 or 3 glimpses of hopes in this discussion, if you could share them with the group, and then we'll try to take at least 1 or 2 questions from the floor. Maybe in the same order, Gian, if you'd like to go first.
As we also discussed here and also in our report, I think there are several key challenges that we face today. Some of the prominent ones are concentration of data power and opaque business models of the infrastructure, the data guzzling infrastructure that's controlled increasingly by capitalist powers. Then the AI mediated content governance and that happens without any accountability. In our report also, we have suggested a range of ways that we can solve this problem. But some of the key suggestions are to enforce competition and interoperability rules that mandate interoperable transparency so that regulators and researchers can audit them independently. You don't need to go back to the company and seek for their data. Second is adopting a rights-based AI regulation that factors into automatically factors risk assessments and explainability. The most critical one is to fund South-South research that support data access provisions, either within the framework of the UN Global Digital Compact or other civil society forums. I think with all of these, we can put human rights at the center, designed for transparency and contestability in our existing systems, and also rebalance incentives that are there for corporate machines.
Thank you so much. It is, I must say, quite a long report. So there is a lot there, 350 pages in Gia. And thank you so much for being an instrumental contributor to this report. Alison.
Thanks, Camille. Because I've already said that I think global cooperation is the only way we're going to find our way out of this, I just want to speak a little bit about the importance of context, which you did speak about. But just to highlight how different this looks in an African context, which is already complicated because I'm talking about 50 different countries. But just to speak a little bit quickly about this, because I know we've got very little time, but just to say some of the assumptions about, how do we continue to bolster our intermediated conversations, our establishment media, our public broadcasters and those sorts of things. Outside of South Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, there is almost no independent press anymore. And there is really only state radio. There's not even, other than the subscription services that are done, and the news on that is basically South African news or the international news. So then there's really no, mediated thing that you can actually use to counter some of the disinformation that's happening. And then in that context, just to explain where you've got large numbers of people who are not even online, and you think that might safeguard you from this kind of disinformation. The use of platforms such as WhatsApp, which are very difficult to see what's happening on them, unlike these other platforms, are used very extensively, where you can now do very effective audio fakes that are far more difficult to see than video fakes, although video fakes have got very good now. Very often you can pick up the video fake, some things are wrong, but an audio fake is very difficult to do. So in very many of our elections that we've looked at across the continent, but you've got cases in South Africa, for example, I've referred to, is where the fake news is taken on a WhatsApp to a community, and then the president is alleged to have said something that is going to be very negative for him in the forthcoming election, or even to incite violence and those kinds of things. And people who have absolutely zero digital literacy are hearing this message. They're hearing the president's voice. It must be the president, those kinds of things. So understanding that this, in our context, also needs a kind of hybrid attention to this. We've seen some very successful examples. We've worked very closely with information regulators, particularly in South Africa, and independent electoral commissioners, in trying to see how we can develop things in South Africa with civil society, to set up hotlines, to set up things. And then just one last thing on that, because I think it's got that kind of local opportunity that you don't, this is only one of the few other things besides global governance that we can do. But the other thing I just wanted to speak about is the intensity and the complexity of this really challenges our existing institutions. So, for example, we've had data scientists working real time on looking at these influences and how the virality is affecting outcomes and, of course, damages and things like that. But they've been kind of called in on terms of the basis of their own working in the last election, within the last sort of 6 months before the election. So our our independent electoral commissions, these bodies need to be restructured completely differently now. And these data scientists are saying, in order to keep up with the technology and begin to try and use these things that AI tracking and these kinds of things, fake tracking, you need these data scientists to be working on this 5 years in advance before they're ready for the next elections. And with our limited budgets and all of these kinds of things, it's just enormous challenges for institutions. But our institutional adaptation, agility that we need to deal with this is just, overwhelming in a context where you're already institutionally constrained.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alison. Angela, on opportunities and challenges for the future.
Thank you very much. I think that one of the biggest challenges is that in fighting the evil, we should not become the evil ourselves. I mean, while fighting disinformation, we should not forget about fundamental rights of citizens, right of freedom of expression, etc. So I think that this is a big challenge for all governments to ensure transparency, to ensure proactive communication, to ensure respect to all rights of their citizens. And what are the opportunities? And again, I would like to elaborate more on challenges. I told that disinformation is not something new. However, for instance, media literacy, we started investing in media literacy only in the recent years. Only in recent years we introduced this discipline in schools. However, sometimes we forget that during the last century and 21st century, the way how people receive information are changed. I mean, previously it was mainly one-way communication from television, from radio. Now it is about dialogue, about opinions, about participation. And for instance, when my grandmother cites some misinformation from Facebook, by the way, she is very active in Facebook, and when I start arguing with her, she says, you know, it is written in Facebook. And here the key word is not the Facebook, the key word is written. So we need to realize that we deal with generation who thinks that if something is written, this is real. So while fighting disinformation, while fighting hybrid war challenges, we should understand that we deal with very different parts of society, with very different sentiments, education, and we need also to understand how to approach them. I think that one of the biggest opportunities is to create this ecosystem, to create the social cohesion, which actually is being targeted hardly by hybrid war actors. We know that polarization, distrust are one of the biggest challenges now. And I think that if we create this environment of cooperation, of participation, and this whole society approach, we can go on the direction that we can really win the situation.
Thank you so much, Angela. I think the party is starting next door, so but we still have 10 minutes to go. Rupa, I'd like to have your comments on, again, with your specific vision on the issue.
Sorry, yeah, I guess AI is the thing I didn't mention at all, and we've got legislation coming through about that. I'm lobbied a lot. I have a lot of creatives in my constituency. Sorry, when I said I have 2 Armenian community centres that hate each other, I was only joking. One is cultural, one is political, so they're slightly different in orientation. One is in Ealing, one is in Acton. I represent both towns, so there's a little rivalry between those two. So I was only joking. Anyhow, lots of the creatives are writing to me about their intellectual property. And Elton John has been on TV saying that the government are complete losers because they're harvesting people's data. So again, in 2015, people talked about fake news. Now it's deep fakes. And there was some concern that this most recent general election of 2024 would be affected by those. I think actually it was more the offline campaign being driven by online factors. So you mentioned WhatsApp, Alison. I think the way that memes and things like that can spread now. Actually, I noticed it in 2017, one of my earlier elections. My opponent, they found, had been in a porn film. And I have not only lots of Armenians, but I've got lots of everything, lots of Somalian, quite religiously conservative Muslims. And one of my campaign team, who was Somalian, said, I'll get that round all the Somali women. They'll hate that. And it spread within seconds. So again, I think technology is all about speed. Within seconds, something can go viral. And we know in COVID, this expression, because it was a virus, and especially when there was so much misinformation about the vaccination. I know as an ethnic minority legislator, we were asked by the then Conservative government to make videos encouraging ethnic minority people to have the vaccination, because traditionally there's hesitancy amongst communities who traditionally were used as guinea pigs, I think, in earlier generations, to try out these things, road test them before they knew if they worked or not. So yeah, I think intellectual property will be big. Again, there's things I don't know, as an old lady like me, as a mother, maybe the dark web and all this algorithm, like how does the algorithmic thing work, that if you've looked at a few sites, then you're sucked into a vortex and you get shown more and more of those. And that's the point of this online safety bill, to stop kids being sucked into a black hole in that way. So, yeah, I mean, you said also that these things are transnational, these sites. So they need transnational legislation, really. So you can't be too much of a isolationist in this regard. I think the Digital Harms Act in the UK was meant to be the strongest ever, but as I say, it's been so long in the making. Since then, there's an EU version of it coming. In the US, they're doing it on a federal state-by-state basis. And then what else? Yeah, I've been put on a committee by the Speaker of the House of Commons to look at sort of physical violence threats. And I think that this is the online informs the offline. So at the last general election, traditionally we have a hustings meeting. We have a few of those. And that's a bit like this, a panel. All the different parties present their programme. The audience can ask questions. Those turned really nasty in 2024. And I think the sort of digital climate has emboldened people to do that. Whereas before there was a bit of decorum and respect. But anyway, yeah. And then lastly, I think a lot of these big tech sites have service standards and user agreements, but they're not ever enforced. So the threat of having this legislation in the UK has made some of these people crack down. But yeah, I don't really know how the future is going to go, because 10 years ago, I would never predicted all this.
Thank you so much. The experience you mentioned made me think of the words of Mario Ressa, a journalist who founded Rappler in the Philippines and won the Nobel Peace Prize in 21. She always says that lies laced with anger and hate travel faster than news. And this is clearly what we've seen over and over. I promised in the outline for this session to open the floor for one or a couple of questions. We still have a little bit of time for that. So if there are any questions, I'd like to pass on the mic. Otherwise, we will go to the front. There's one from our colleagues over there. I don't know, Anush, if we can have... Oh, there we go.
Thank you to the panelists. My name is Andrew Heffernan. I'm with the Information Integrity Lab at the University of Ottawa in Canada. A lot of what everyone has spoken to, and especially your comments just now, Camille, spoke to, I think, the disinformation economy that is out there. And I think so much of it comes down to the fact that disinformation is economic. There's a lot of economic incentives for actors to do so, and that's partly why it spreads so fast, because people click on it, and as a result, social media platforms benefit. And if we think of climate change disinformation specifically, fossil fuel companies and petrostates benefit from perpetuating climate disinformation so that we continue to burn fossil fuels. All of you, I think, have already begun to allude to this to some degree, but I'm wondering if you can add to it, or if you have any specific thoughts about how we can reverse those economic incentives so that it isn't the very interesting headlines that spread and that are incentivized economically to continue to spread, but that there is more economic incentive for accurate information and information integrity for our ecosystems out there.
It's the business model. Any thoughts from the panel? We'll still have 5 minutes, so we'll only take that question. Maybe a quick last round table. But Alison, if you want to start us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the kind of critical question. So, I mean, I think there are a number of things that can be done, and I think it's like this because a number of things haven't been done, and that is, quite classical competition regulation and market dominance regulation that I think we're now beginning to see in the US, and I think that has very dramatic consequences. So the model, the advertising model, preferences the clicking of the thing, and in order to get that you generate that. And there's a lot of evidence on the profits that go with fake news, and of course the company's reluctance to do that. So I think that all of that control that, for example, Google has had on the browser, in the advertising models, etc., that are systematically now being addressed in the US over these number of cases by the FTC, really have the potential, because it's on scale. If they are successfully implemented there, and it's been interesting to see under the current administration, that kind of stuff is still at the moment ticking on. I don't know for how long, but that this could have a very dramatic effect, because this goes to exactly to that business model that you were speaking about. And then I suppose the other one is then the alternatives. So using the open platforms, the platforms that are not being driven by those algorithms for blue skies instead of X and all of these other alternatives. But these have been very difficult to scale, to get people to move off those platforms, especially if they're on that for economic purposes, for advertising those. Then what's the purpose of going onto a much smaller platform, to try and attract those people? Yeah. But I really think that's sort of classical market regulation, competition regulation. If it had been done a long time before, we wouldn't be in the position we're in now. Even the mergers, Instagram and Meta and WhatsApp and stuff, if that had been done properly, we wouldn't have that problem now.
And of course, data governance is critical in that aspect. Gian, I don't know if you want to reflect a little bit on that question of the business model.
I think the short answer would be to, like I said, embrace open source softwares and open standards. So, like Alison also alluded to, that we are in this position because the classical legislations have not been enforced, and because there have been less incentives for open source communities to come together and build something. There have been also not a lot of oversight or encouragement from governments towards these communities to foster and innovate enough. So I think if we were to go the open source road, we would see that there is a collective sense within these communities that would challenge the big tech monopolies that we are seeing.
Thank you so much. Angela, Rupa, I don't know if you have some final remarks. We still have a couple of minutes.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to answer the question. Actually, it is very important and very difficult question. And as a government, I think here again, our role is to create the relevant ecosystem when media outlets, social media outlets, they not become more profitable because of spreading fake news. One of the regulations that I think might be very useful is the real beneficiary regulation, and also self-regulation systems, because if some media outlet or social media companies, they gain their profit from advertising, people would like to advertise their goods, their services in a platform that has a good reputation. And if we have the real beneficiary regulations, I think that it gives opportunity for companies to show the good, to prove good reputation for themselves. And again, about the evils, we are just creating the ecosystem, and we really rely on our partners, business partners, civil society to support us in creating of this self-regulatory framework. For closing remarks, thank you. I think it is very important that in all our panel discussions, our panelists, our guests, they raise the issue of disinformation, the importance of transparent and strategic communication. As a communication specialist, I'm really glad that now this topic is so high on the agenda. What we should do, we should take the moment, we should create coalition, we should synergize, and I think that if we work together again, we can fight all the, maybe not all the challenges, it is too optimistic, but we can deal with current challenges and manage them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Angela. This is really what animates a lot of us in the field. Rupa, and then I have very short remarks to conclude.
Yeah, no, thank you. I guess carrot stick approach, that if there's suitable punitive sanctions that take place towards these big platforms, they will think again about spreading hate speech, disinformation, and all this. So I think this Online Safety Act has the power to levy big fines. We've seen it with some broadcasters in the UK. I think there's a channel, GB News, that unlike our public broadcasters that have to give equal time, certainly in an election, to the different political parties, that one was fined, I think, £100,000 for having a programme of Rishi Sunak being interviewed by an all-conservative audience of the so-called public. So they had to, I think it's nearly bankrupted them. So yeah, possibly, I don't know, people would always say lock them up, but I don't know, put Elon Musk behind bars if he's going to do really bad stuff, those kind of things. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you so much. Thanks for a wonderful panel. We'll touch on a lot of things tonight. So really thank you. Thanks to the audience for staying with us tonight. Maybe three things to end. I think one thing that was of interest to us is how can we connect also to other fields? And I would see two. One, I think Angela referred to it regarding the open governance agenda. And we just published with our colleagues at the Open Government Partnership a joint report on how can we bridge the open governance and information integrity agendas. This is available on our website, and you're most welcome to go and look at it and work with us on its implementation. The second is how can we link it to again critical moment that will be coming up and not only in Armenia with the summit of the European community, and then the COP17 on biodiversity that's been mentioned a few times already today. We have a work stream on environmental disinformation at the Forum on Information Democracy that is co-chaired by Armenia and Brazil, and we actually have an open call on environmental disinformation, notably focused on biodiversity. Everyone is most welcome to join. And so, yes, I think I will end on this note of collaboration and really collaboration and implementation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and thanks to our distinguished panelists. Thank you so much.